So, welcome everybody to our session this morning entitled Empowering Regions, the Impact and Evolution of Devolved Administration. I'm chairing today a duo. My name is Herbert. I'm a senior lecturer, geographer at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and I'm also the Regional Clean Air Champion for Scotland.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Lewis. I'm the Regional Clean Air Champion for Wales, Professor Emeritus at Swansea University, and I'm also Chair of the Welsh Government's Clean Air Advisory Panel.
So I think today's session really follows on nicely from Louise Heathwaite at NERC yesterday, talking about the importance of the various regions and looking at research and policy in local areas. And that's where we come in as Regional Clean Air Champions, looking at how we support regional dissemination of clean air programme findings and networking amongst local stakeholders. And the aim of the session today is really to look at how air quality policy has evolved over time in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and looking at how that's evolved over time, but then also hopefully having a chance to look at how things might look in the future as well. Where are the future directions? So we've asked each of our speakers here, who we'll introduce when they come up to speak, we've asked them to talk about how air quality policy has evolved in their regions, and then we've got a question that we will be asking them, and hopefully if there's time we'll then be able to throw open the questions to you as an audience to ask them some questions as well. So that is the plan for the next kind of half an hour, 40 minutes or so. So first up, speaking this morning, we have Neil Rowland. So he's a Senior Research Fellow at the Administrative Data Research Centre for Northern Ireland, based at Queen's University in Belfast. And he's also the UKRI Regional Clean Air Champion for Northern Ireland. Do you want to come up?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Heather, for the introduction. As Heather said, I'm the Regional Clean Air Champion for Northern Ireland, and I'm also a researcher. What Heather didn't say is that I'm a man of limited talents, so policy isn't one of those. I'm not involved in policy making, but what I will talk about is just my sort of perceptions of how things have evolved in Northern Ireland. What I'm going to talk about is, first of all, a little bit about what devolution actually is, talk about the unique challenges for Northern Ireland policy making, and that'll help us inform us as to why we don't currently yet have a clean air strategy for Northern Ireland. But I will finish on a positive note and talk about the progress in recent years towards developing a strategy. So what is devolution? Well, very briefly, Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland are devolved regions of the UK, and this means that each of these regions has a legislative body which has the power to set policies over certain so-called devolved matters, and this includes environmental policies. It is quite limited, so we can't, for example, set national defence policies, but it does give each region the ability to come up with policies which are tailored to the particular challenges of those regions. Now in Northern Ireland, what does this look like? Well, we have an elected assembly which has legislative control over devolved matters, and we also have an executive, and this is composed of ministers who are in charge of the government departments, and they're also in charge of public services delivery. And those ministers sign off on new policies. It varies a little bit across the different regions, but this is very briefly what it looks like in Northern Ireland. Now, it wouldn't be a presentation about Northern Ireland without talking about our uniquely complicated politics. So, as many of you are probably aware, we have a divided society. We have two communities who essentially have very different views of what a future Northern Ireland should look like, or indeed whether Northern Ireland should actually continue to exist. And this poses a problem for devolved policy making, which is difficult enough at the best of times. We have had a lot of political instability over the past 26 years when the Assembly was instituted. And according to Wikipedia, the Northern Ireland Assembly has been suspended about 6 times since 1998, for roughly a total of about 10 years. So that's 10 years when those devolved institutions weren't up and running. And obviously this poses a challenge for long-term planning, but also the development of new legislation. So what I can talk about is the impact of a bespoke regional policy in Northern Ireland in terms of improving air quality. But what we can talk about are the impacts of the absence of that sort of policy. So like many other regions of the UK, we have problems to do with pollution from road transport, ammonia emissions, solid fuel burning, fine particulate matter. In Northern Ireland, ammonia emissions are particularly problematic because we have such a large agricultural sector, and agri-food sector in particular. We also have lots of problems with solid fuel burning. So not only do we have problems with people burning wood, but a lot of people still burn coal to heat their homes in the autumn and winter. So these are challenges that we need specific tailored strategies to try and deal with. And because we don't have a clean air strategy, we don't really have anything like that at the minute. So the implication is that Northern Ireland is lagging behind other regions of the UK. It's also lagging behind our nearest neighbour, so we share a land border with the Republic of Ireland, and so transboundary issues are something that are quite important when thinking about development policies. Roughly 2 years ago, the Republic of Ireland introduced a ban on the sale of household coal, which is something that I think we should be aspiring to in Northern Ireland. And I know that's an aspiration elsewhere. So these are things that we're currently not able to implement. I won't spend too much time on this slide. Essentially, at present, air quality management in Northern Ireland looks very similar to other parts of the UK. So we have duties on district councils, or local authorities, as you all call them, to review air quality, to assess whether objectives are being met, come up with action plans, etc. There are also duties on DERA, who is Northern Ireland's equivalent of DEFRA. So they're tasked with monitoring specific pollutants, ensuring compliance, and letting the public know when high pollution events occur. Now, as I said, I would try to end on a more positive note. So in recent years, Northern Ireland has taken steps to developing its own clean air strategy for Northern Ireland. And this began in autumn of 2020, when a discussion document was issued for public consultation. So that set out a range of policies which could be introduced in Northern Ireland, and it invited views from the public and also ideas from the public about what else should be included in that strategy. The consultation closed in spring of 2021. And in summer of 2022, a synopsis of those responses was published. Today, we're awaiting the next steps of that clean air strategy. We know that preliminary findings have been discussed with the Minister, and because a lot of the issues are cross-cutting, so they tie in with things that the Department of the Economy, for example, are working on. They also tie in with a separate ammonia emission strategy, which DERA is also looking at. An interdepartmental working group has been set up. But as you can see, again, the impact of our divided society is pervasive. And during this period, there's been 2 years when the executive has not been in operation. That was only restored in January this year. So during that time, no new legislation could be developed. So that's where we are in Northern Ireland at the minute. We hope this clean air strategy will be brought forward soon. But I just wanted to finish with just sort of my experience as regional clean air champion has been really positive. So I have worked with, and I know a lot of the officials involved in drafting this strategy, and they're very receptive to the evidence that comes from academia and other sources, and they do take that on board when thinking about which sort of policies would make an impact. So I just wanted to share that before I finish, and I'd be happy to answer questions from the panel later on. So thank you all for listening.
Andrew Taylor from Scottish Government. He trained originally as a soil scientist before seeing the error of his ways and joining Scottish Government looking at air quality in 2001. So he's been there for a long time. So looking forward to hearing your reflections, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Heather. Good morning, everybody. I don't have any slides to show you this morning, so I thought what I would do, rather than try and give you a potted history of air quality in Scotland over the last 25 years, I thought I would just highlight 3 examples that show how policy has developed and evolved over that period. So starting right back at the beginning in 1999, first example is the relationship between central and local government. So in Scotland we have 32 local authorities, they're all unitary authorities, which is a manageable number, and that's allowed us to build very strong one-to-one connections with each of them, right from the early days of devolution and from the start of the local air quality management system. So we recognised very early on that this was going to be one of the most effective and indeed impactful ways of facilitating and introducing air quality improvements in Scotland. So this close relationship has also helped us to get a strong handle on what the key issues are in specific areas, which in turn allows us to target funding and also support to the right places and provides a good steer for the development also of national policy development. So the second example, moving on to 2006, we established the Scottish Air Quality website and database, which over the last 18 years has become the respected source of air quality information and data in Scotland, both for air quality practitioners and the wider public. So one of the key decisions we took at the start of this project was to establish a QA/QC regime for monitoring sites, for local authority monitoring sites, which is equivalent to the UK-wide AURN, the Automatic Urban and Rural Network, which could in some ways be described as the gold standard of air quality monitoring. So over the years we've built up the numbers of sites in the Scottish Monitoring Network, and now we have 103 in total with good geographical coverage across the country from the borders to the Shetland Islands. And out of that 103 sites, 78 of those are local authority sites. So what's that's done? It's provided us with a robust long-term body of data for serving as a foundation for evidence-based policy development. For example, in 2016, Scotland became the first country in Europe to introduce the then WHO guideline for PM 2.5 into domestic legislation. And we could do that with confidence because we had 10 years of robust data to justify that, which we could also use to project forward into the future to give a reasonable estimate of when we were likely to meet that objective. And also in parallel to the SAQD project, it also illustrates how collaborative working with partner organisations has evolved over that period as well. Scottish Environment Protection Agency, SEPA, which is our environment agency, has been very closely involved in helping us take that project forward and develop it. And that relationship has developed very strongly over the years. That's a two-way process. We rely very heavily on SEPA for input, and likewise we do the same for them. And just in passing, before I move on to the third example, I'll also mention in 2015 we introduced the first air quality strategy for Scotland, which was separate from the rest of the UK, Cleaner Air for Scotland. That lasted for 5 years, and in 2020 we introduced our second air quality strategy, which after much thought and debate, we imagined it would be called Cleaner Air for Scotland 2, and that runs until 2026. And that includes a series of 80-odd actions across a wide range of policy areas which we're using to deliver further improvements in air quality in Scotland. And then the final example I'm going to mention is the most recent one, which is the introduction of low emission zones in Scotland's 4 biggest cities, which is to say Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. So the Glasgow zone is the longest established one. We introduced that at the end of 2018. The other 3 cities just came online in 2023 and were only enforced earlier this year. So initial results from Glasgow suggest that while traffic levels have remained stable, NO2 levels have declined over that period, which suggests that the LEZ may be having an impact. It's too early to say what the trends are in the other 3 cities. So LEZ introduction has been a really good example of cross-departmental policy working and engagement in Scotland. Its introduction has been primarily led by our transport agency, Transport Scotland, and it's a really good illustration of how that particular agency has evolved over the years as well. I'm thinking back 10 to 15 years ago when the main focus was essentially on infrastructure development and maintenance and pretty much little else, to move to the forefront of really developing landmark environmental improvement policies in Scotland. LEZ being the primary one, and others I could mention, like the commitment to reduce road miles by 20% in Scotland by 2030. So also an interesting feature of Scotland's LEZ I'd like to mention is that they're not charging zones. So what we wanted to do right from the outset with LEZ was not to give drivers who could afford to do so the opportunity to pay to pollute. So if you're not compliant, you don't get into an LEZ. There's no way around that. And we think that's an equitable way of doing things. So those are my 3 examples of how policy has developed in Scotland since devolution. And I just want to finish by saying what I think our 5 key challenges are going to be over the coming period, some of which we've heard about a lot here over the last couple of days. So number 1, the updated World Health Organization guidelines and how we respond to those in a policy context. Number 2, indoor air quality. Number 3, non-transport sources of air pollutants, notably agriculture and domestic combustion. Number 4, public messaging, public engagement. How do we improve that? And lastly, number 5, how we coordinate with net zero policies to drive co-benefits for both greenhouse gas reductions and air pollutant reductions as well. Benefits for both. So thank you for listening, and again, happy to take questions later in the session.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So our final panel member to speak is Roger Herbert from Welsh Government, and Roger is Head of Air Quality Evidence, Monitoring and Assessment of the Environmental Protection Division in Welsh Government. Roger is a very proud Englishman, but he's been in Wales long enough to be fluent in Welsh, I'm sure. So croeso, dechrau mewn, Roger. Diolch.
Thanks, Paul. I don't tend to talk. Okay, I think I've had a presentation. I'm not sure where it is. Oh, right, yeah. Thanks. Right. I'll try and get. How do I move slides? Thanks. So yeah, no, just quickly then. I'll give you a bit of context in terms of the legislative and policy background, how it's evolved. I'll talk to you a bit about a new act that has been laid in the Senate this year, and also talk a bit about how we use evidence to inform policy. So right at the beginning of time, the National Assembly for Wales met for the first time in 1999. It's now called Senedd Cymru, or the Welsh Parliament, to reflect its legislative status. The environment is a devolved matter that includes air quality, so ministers can legislate in those areas. Along with everywhere else, air pollution is a local, regional and international issue. So the framework for air quality policy is governed by a mixture of evolving domestic and international legislation. And also, I should say, the levers to address air pollution are multi-sectoral, as we know, some of which have devolved competence, some of which have reserved competence. In terms of background and some things we've worked on since then, we have faced many similar challenges across the UK, but in Wales there's particular situations. So we've faced challenges, short-term challenges with episodes of PM10 around the steelworks in Port Talbot. So we've worked closely with the regulators, operators, the local community. We also work closely with independent experts to take advice on what we can do, and the Air Quality Expert Group helped put a work programme together over 12 years ago now, I think. And we pulled that together into a short-term action plan, which was published. In a similar vein, we faced challenges with levels of nickel and benzopyrene in South Wales, and we've put similar reports on measures together in order to mitigate risks of exceedance of legislative limits. And alongside other countries, we also have faced challenges with roadside NO2, and we've put in place action plans for that. Then moving on in terms of more recent times, in the Senedd there's been cross-consensus support for action on air quality, and that led to the introduction of specific commitments within our programme for government. That led to us developing in 2019 and publishing in 2020 our first national clean air plan for Wales, and that brought together our cross-sectoral measures under 4 different themes, and it contains specific commitments. A big one was to introduce a Clean Air Act for Wales, and there was strong support across the Senedd to do that. We've discharged that this year through the laying in the Senedd of the Environment, Air Quality and Soundscapes Wales Act. So that was laid in February. There's been a raft of Welsh legislation laid in the Senedd as well over time that has supported improvements in air quality across different sectors. One that isn't directly air quality related, but I thought I should flag, is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and that sets out the Sustainable Development Principle and public body duties to work towards long-term well-being, which we all have to work towards. Right, so just say a bit more about the Air Quality and Soundscapes Act, because there's several different aspects to it. Biggest interest was in the National Air Quality Target Setting Framework. So that includes a specific duty to set a target for PM 2.5. There's a further duty to set another air quality target from a list of specified pollutants within the Act. That list reflects the World Health Organization Air Quality Guideline pollutant update in 2021, with the addition of ammonia due to its impacts on ecosystems and biodiversity. It also includes broad powers for Welsh ministers to legislate in terms of to set targets for any matter in relation to air quality. If I move on to, there are further provisions for promoting awareness. So there's a duty on Welsh ministers to promote awareness of air pollution and how it can be reduced. Then there's further duties on in terms of active travel. So ministers and local authorities are required to promote active travel to reduce air pollution. There are further duties for ministers to produce a national air quality strategy and review it from time to time, so on a 5-yearly cycle. So we've adopted our Clean Air Plan for Wales as our first strategy, so everything we do stems from that. There were changes made to the local air quality management regime. So local authorities had been had to have regard to air quality from time to time. They now have to do that annually. And in their air quality action plans, they need to estimate compliance dates for compliance with their objectives. Then in terms of aiding enforcement at the local authority level, there were changes made to smoke control, and it turns the criminal sanctions regime into a civil sanctions regime to make that simpler to enforce. On a similar vein, there were changes, powers to create a monetary range for a fixed penalty notice for stationary vehicle idling, again to try and aid enforcement where there are issues of idling. Then there were provisions in relation to trunk road charging, and it expands ministers' ability to introduce trunk road charging schemes where to address air pollution. And finally, bottom right, it also introduced the concept of soundscapes, and there's a duty to publish a national soundscape strategy due to its synergies with local air quality. Final slide, a bit about how we're using evidence to inform policy. As of course we know, air quality is complex and multidisciplined, and there are multiple mechanisms that we use to inform policy. So in the policy development process, we have to undertake integrated impact assessments at all stages, and evidence is really important to inform all of those. So we work closely with stakeholders, and public engagement is really important, as we've heard. Critically, we also work with independent expert groups. That's also a requirement in the Air Quality and Soundscapes Act for some of those provisions, to take advice from groups. So we've set up a Clean Air Advisory Panel in Wales. Paul is our chair. We've appointed independent members, some of which are in the room. We also have representatives from key public bodies and also representatives from a group of NGOs to take their views into consideration. That complements the existing independent expert advice we get from UK groups like AQUAG and COMEEP. We work with academia with bespoke contracts for assessments and advice. We have PhD studentships. We get great value from those. We've also had some really great advice from Clean Air Programme partners as well. We work with, again, public bodies, local authorities, and our statutory advisors. Again, we have bespoke contracts for technical consultants to undertake modelling, particularly to support the development of target proposals. Yeah, so I think I'll end there, and I'd say everything that we're doing is a joint effort, both inside and outside of government. And I would also say, by recognising the differences in Wales and the devolved context in your work, it really can, I think, help enable us to pull that through into policy and sort of maximise its impact. I'd also like to say thank you to our Clean Air champion, Paul, and yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Roger, and we wait for Roger to retake his seat. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about some of the challenges each of the regions are facing, trying to tackle some similar problems like the solid fuel burning, NO2, as you all mentioned, but also some very different air quality issues within their region. So for the time we have left, we pose some questions to the panel members, and I'll start off, if I may, with a question from the regional champion, which does include you, Neil. Before we then hand over to the floor for further questions. So it was interesting to see how each government works with very many organisations and experts from across the UK to gather evidence and then seek advice on policy development. But what opportunities do you see there are for you as governments working together across the devolved nations in the future? And slightly biased here, but should we start with Wales and Roger? Yeah. Anyone?
Is that working? Yeah, it is. Yeah, so we have existing arrangements. We've got the Air Quality Common Framework working groups. So we have regular periodic meetings between all UK governments in relation to policy and legislation that came across from European directives, and we have one-to-one bilateral discussions on areas of common interest as well. And I'd say we also have discussions with other governments as well outside UK, including Ireland. So I think we can all learn from one another on common areas and approaches.
That's Roger. Andrew.
Yeah, so I guess it's a cliche to say that air pollution knows no boundaries, but at the same time it's no less true for that. And despite the political, geographical, social and cultural differences across the UK nations, as Roger has just said, we do have common issues that we're all trying to work towards, and we can both learn from each other's experiences in dealing with those issues in their own context, and then come together to be continuing to deal with those issues more effectively on a collaborative basis where necessary, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. Neil.
Yeah, I think I would just echo those comments. As I said, I'm not involved in policy myself, but I can see that there's a lot of potential for Northern Ireland to learn from the other regions, Wales and Scotland, that are a bit further ahead in terms of their timeline for developing and delivering policies through regional clean air strategies. But I think as well, Northern Ireland can learn a lot from the Republic of Ireland as well. They've again moved ahead in certain areas, and that's another thing that I think necessitates sort of working together.
Great, thanks, Neil. So we've got time for a few questions, so let's open it up to the floor. So does anyone have, if you are asking questions, it'd be good if you could ask questions to the panel, I suppose perhaps to individual panel members, but do we have any questions?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Catherine from Lancaster. Question for all of the panellists. Do you engage with community groups who've maybe collected citizen science data? And what value do those groups and their data be to clean air policy development in the devolved nations?
I'll start. Yeah. So this is, in my talk, I mentioned the 5 key challenges that I see for Scotland over the coming years. Public engagement was one of those that I mentioned. This is something that we've only really started to think about in any kind of detailed way in Scotland over the last few years since we introduced our second Clean Air for Scotland strategy. And I think it's fair to say that we still have a long way to go in developing that sort of approach to public engagement. We're still finding our way to a certain extent. So I think that probably the answer to that question from our perspective is that we've had very little direct dealings with community groups so far, but it is an area that we recognise we need to develop further, and we do hope to be doing that over the next few years. One of our key actions in the current air quality strategy is to develop a public engagement framework, and clearly community engagement with community groups is going to be an important part of that.
So yeah, in Wales, I think it's on a bespoke basis, depending on the area of work that we're tackling. So there's a lot of work in Port Talbot. There's, but then in general terms, there's been lots of plans for public engagement on air pollution, but we really want to join up and do it on a more environment basis, so we're not giving mixed messages. So there's a sort of program of work looking at joining all of that up, and that's still in motion as well. So it's a combination of approaches.
Just very briefly, yes, I know DERA do a lot to inform the public about air pollution, and they work with, I think they've worked with schools in the past, for example, to teach young people about air pollution. And they've worked with us quite a lot as well. So I think that is something that's important.